happens every 7 years when Advent 4 and Christmas Eve fall on the same day. And I'm going to ask our vestry person of the week to sort of put his hand in front of the lens for a moment. So while you'll hear me say this, I'll have plausible deniability. This is what I refer to as the Christmas from hell. Thank you. Every 7 years. It means that we have Advent 4, 8 o'clock and 10:30 services, and then everyone rushes in and we transform the church into Christmas in time for 5 o'clock Christmas pageant, 10:30 carols, and 11 o'clock the midnight mass. It's a really big, busy day. But I think even more than the busyness is the downside of losing an extra week of Advent. Because Advent is all about getting ready with those wonderful traditions that you and I hold so dear. Tradition is incredibly important because tradition helps us define and contextualize what is new in our world. Think about it for a moment. From our gospel, John is baptizing, and the church and the people don't know what to make of this strange man baptizing in the Jordan. They ask him, "Are you Elijah?" And he says, "No." "Are you the prophet?" "No." They look to the past to try to define who John is. But John is somebody new. He is proclaiming somebody new, and he's doing it in a bizarre way. He dresses radically and eats bizarre things. How do we interpret Jesus in a very modern and what can seem a bizarre world in which even the Food Network is giving us unusual things to eat? We do it by looking back. By embracing those traditions that help us make sense of what is modern. And we're surrounded by many of them, or will be surrounded by many of them in the next week or so. I go back to perhaps the idea of the Advent wreath. Just this week, we celebrated Saint Lucia, who is still the patron saint of many Scandinavian countries. She was a 4th century woman who led a remarkable life and gave the tradition of the Scandinavian people of wearing a wreath of candles on your head and coming downstairs bringing the light into the family every year. And one daughter was always chosen to be Saint Lucia or Saint Lucy, and was called Lucy for the entire day. Because that idea of light and darkness is so much a part of this time of year. You know, we know Jesus wasn't born in December. You know, the scholars have that figured out. Jesus wasn't born in the year 0 either. They keep changing the calendar around. Jesus was probably born in 5 or 6. And the season was chosen. Christmas was chosen. The idea that we'll celebrate light in the midst of darkness, they picked the winter solstice to do it. That's times when days start getting longer. And if we go to the actual scientific solstice, we can say, oh, they're so antiquated, they missed it. No, they knew it. They got it. It's not December 25th anymore, but it's not the problem of the church and the people who picked the date of Christmas. They just keep changing the calendar. You know, the Julian, the Augustan calendar, it moves around. They knew what they were doing. They knew that Jesus was all about light shining in darkness, showing us a way forward, a way to live, a way to be human beings. So that's where the Advent calendar comes from. Christmas tree. How many have trees up so far this year? Yes, yes, wonderful. Oh, I get 2 trees back there. Do we know where the Christmas tree comes from? It's a German custom, and it's the evergreen. The idea that there is a tree whose leaves do not fall. It's perpetual. It sustains. It's livelihood. It's symbols of life, even in the midst of all other things falling down seasonally. It's evergreen. And where did we get that in this country? Well, George III was German. They had a Bavarian succession brought over the Christmas tree to England. And it was popularized by Prince Albert and Queen Victoria. And that seeped into British culture, and it came across, as we call the herring pond, and is now so much a part of our lives, reminding us of evergreenness. So Jesus is light. Jesus is always alive and present. And I brought in a couple symbols of that from my own Christmas decorations. Each year I put out 2 creches, and they're very different creches. And I brought in a few figures from them. And the first creche is my father's creche from when he was a boy. And it's a creche that very much is symbolic of a period in our country that was very hard, that my father grew up in, called the Great Depression. He often referred to it as the Depression creche. But he put it up every year of his life because it was a sign of hope and of moving forward and of being reminded of what this is all about. I also put up my godmother's creche, which is much more contemporary in many ways. My godmother was always trying to do new things. So she let this creche go, and then she bought this creche, and then she bought another creche, and then she let that one go. Near the end of her life, she bought this creche. And she decided, well, I'm going to give this creche to Paul so he can have a really nice creche to put up. And it's a very elegant creche. It's very beautiful, and I remember my godmother very fondly when I look at this creche. But it contrasts with a creche from the Depression. And it reminds me, as I look at the 2 every year, it reminds me that historically we go through our lives in many stages. But the constant of every one of those stages is Jesus Christ and the presence of God, the light, the evergreenness of Christ. And if we wonder how to interpret it in a world that changes and that evolves, that gives us always new challenges and new possibilities, we remember the traditions of Advent, the traditions of Christmas that root us in our faith, that remind us that as pilgrim souls, the things we can always count on are a loving and compassionate God who is asking, who is yearning ever to be more present and nearer when we need God most. Amen. Since I preached the sermon on Sunday, several people have thanked me for helping make the traditions of Christmas, and particularly the day that Christmas is chosen, seem easier to understand. But in fact, there's nothing really easy about it. It had so many calendar changes. If we go back, the shortest day of the year used to be December 13th, and then that was changed to become the winter solstice falling on December 21 to 22 in the year 1582 by Pope Gregory VIII. December 25th was chosen as the day of Easter, not by Gregory the 28th on that date, but by Julius I, and the first day he asked for Christmas to be celebrated on December 25th was thought to be 336. So it gets even more and more complicated. Why do we say that we have this window of sometime between 2 and 7 BC for the date of Christmas? Well, we don't have those records, of course, to know. However, many scholars choose on the 4th or 5th because there's some evidence that an astronomical event took place that could have resembled something like the Star of Bethlehem. So, I hope I've made it even more muddier, but through all of the mud and the muck of trying to figure these things out, and the mud and the muck of our world today, I wish you a very bright, joyous, and happy Christmas.